Did you know that there is a Babylonian pillar of laws, similar to the Ten Commandments but older? Join us now for a look at the Code of Hammurabi versus the Ten Commandments. Everyone knows the story of the Ten Commandments. 10 sacred laws given to Moses and man by God on a mountain called Sinai. Many people have debated the accuracy of this so-called legend due to the fact of the lack of evidence that's located in the Sinai Peninsula where the event was said to have occurred. Researchers have proven that the biblical location is actually confirmed in Galatians 4:25, where it says, "For this Agar is Mt.Sinai in Arabia." This location is actually further east in Saudi Arabia in the actual land of Midian, at a place known as Jebel el-Lawz. Even with this evidence, scoffers still dismiss the claims of the Bible. One excuse that they give is the claim that the laws related to us in the Bible have been plagiarized from other Mesopotamian cultures, most notably the Code of Hammurabi. King Hammurabi of Babylon is said to have lived from 1810 to 1750 BC. To put this in perspective, he was born approximately 12 years prior to Abraham's death and died the same year as Ishmael, Abraham's son. This was all about 14 years before Jacob fled Esau and went to Syria. Overall, Hammurabi had a very short lifespan when compared to the patriarchs. Hammurabi was king of Babylon for a reign of 42 years, during which time he took the kingdom from only being between the Tigris and Euphrates River and expanded it to reach from the Persian Gulf north and west towards modern-day Turkey and Syria. Besides gaining territory, one of his other great accomplishments was the formation of nearly 300 standardized laws and ordinances to govern the people. These were written in the common language of the people and placed in a central location where everyone could read them. Many say that these protocols are the origin of an eye for an eye belief. Today we have copies of these laws in the form of ancient clay tablets, but they are best preserved in the Hammurabi Stela, otherwise known as the Code of Hammurabi. Thought to have been placed around 1754 BC, which was approximately 4 years before his death, this ancient monument stands a massive 7 foot 4 inches tall and is carved of basalt. What is unique about this particular monument is its shape. The massive rock is designed to resemble a giant index finger, complete with a fingernail at the top. Inside of this fingernail section is a relief of Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, who's the god of justice, which scholars say is the origin of the Moses in the mountain, quote-unquote, myth. Along the remaining finger portion, the laws are carved into the stone with a curse on any who dared to think of changing or adding to this law. Hammurabi and his law code became increasingly popular, even receiving praise from those outside of his kingdom. Other ancient kingdoms strived to model themselves after this king and his laws. The monument was later moved to the Persian capital of Susa, and Cyrus the Great, who defeated Babylon over 1,200 years later, placed copies of this law in his library. If the timeline of Hammurabi is correct, then he lived well before the commandments and the law of Moses, which was given in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Could it be true that the Israelites borrowed their history from the Syrians during Jacob's time with Laban? Or did the ancient Mesopotamians use their knowledge of the truth and put their own pagan spin on things? Let's take a look at what the Bible says on this subject. First, did God's law exist prior to him speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai? Genesis 26:5 tells us that the ordinances and laws that were given at Sinai were not something that was new. They had been around much earlier than this, at least since Abraham's time, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. The laws of clean and unclean existed since at least the time of the flood, because animals entered the ark based on clean beasts and unclean beasts. And Noah observed the sacrificial laws in his offering after leaving the ark and offered burnt offerings on the altar. There must have been a law prior to this, because in Genesis chapter 4, both Cain, guilty of murder, and Lamech, guilty of murder and polygamy, knew about it and were judged accordingly. Also, let's not forget the people at the time of the flood who were nothing but pure evil and received their judgment when the deluge happened. 1 John 3:4 says that sin is the transgression of the law. Therefore, the law must have existed prior to Adam and Eve sinning in the Garden of Eden. And if that hasn't convinced you yet, listen to this. The plan of salvation was created before this planet ever existed, according to 1 Peter 1:20. Part of the plan of salvation was the temple service. This plan required a temple in heaven and one on earth. At Mt.Sinai, God gave Moses instructions on how to construct an earthly tabernacle or temple. This was to be a copy or a pattern of the one that was in heaven, down to every last detail. Part of this included the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of the Testimony, which God commanded Moses to put the testimony that I shall give thee in. You should note that the Ten Commandments are also referred to as the tables of the testimony. If the ark here was made after the one in heaven, and the one here was commanded to have the 10 Commandments put inside of it, then the one in heaven must also have a set of 10 Commandments, which would have existed at least since the plan of salvation was initiated, and definitely prior to Mount Sinai, as everything for the early structure was a copy of that which was in heaven. This is shown in Revelations 11:19, which refers to the heavenly ark as the ark of his testament, or testimony, and as we saw in Exodus, the testimony is the law or the commandments. So how did people learn about the law prior to Moses? There were many people prior to Moses that knew about God's law. How did they know about it? Somebody must have told them. In Genesis 2:17, we have the first example of a rule or a law in the command not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This couldn't have been the only conversation between God and man. It's just the only one that's recorded biblically prior to the fall. At some point, there must have been conversations between the heavenly host and the humans, which provided them with the law. Otherwise, how could man know what was right or wrong? The law acts as a moral compass. If you don't know which direction to take, then it would be unjust to punish someone for an action that they didn't know was wrong. And if anything, God is a merciful God. Although the imagery on the Code of Hammurabi may have been placed there prior to Moses, there were many other people that could have been given the exact same set of laws and statutes in a very similar manner, such as Adam, Enoch, Noah, and even Abraham. So the ancient Babylonians could have easily borrowed from that encounter to create their legends, rather than the Israelites borrowing the story from the Babylonians. Did Abraham and his descendants borrow the law? Let's take a look back at our timeline. If the historians are correct in Hammurabi's dates, which is debatable, but that is a whole different story, then it would make it a bit difficult for Abraham to have used Hammurabi's ideas to obey God's commandments and laws, because I highly doubt that a man who's 163 years old would have listened to a newborn baby on ideas about government and law. Keep in mind, Hammurabi was only 12 years old when Abraham died, and they lived hundreds of miles apart. As for Abraham's descendants, especially those of Jacob, they stayed pretty much close to the belief system of Abraham. It wasn't until they moved to Egypt and had been there for quite some time before they started to adjust their belief system. And even then, it wasn't towards Babylonian beliefs, but Egyptian ones. What are the similarities between the Code of Hammurabi and the law of God in the Bible? Let's take a look. First, we have the shape that the stone is carved in. The monument is carved in the shape of a finger, complete with a fingernail, and is covered in writing on all sides. We know that the 10 Commandments were 2 tables of testimony that were written with the finger of God on both of their sides. 2. The manner in which the law was given to mankind. Both the monument and the Bible say that the Code of Laws was directly given to humans from God in a physical conversation. 3. The contents of the writing. Both give very detailed regulations regarding marriage, divorce, adultery, servants, murder, trade, theft, liability, restitutions, punishment. However, the Code of Hammurabi can be much more harsh in the punishments, and it is biased towards social standing, unlike the Bible where judgment is equal regardless of your status within the community. The nature of the law. Both laws were unchangeable. This is one element that was passed down not only to the Babylonian kings, but also that of Media-Persia, as we can see in Daniel chapter 6 and in Esther chapter 8. And these two events occurred over 1,200 years later. God's law cannot be changed. He says, "For I am the Lord, and I change not, and my covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that has gone out of my lips." And last but not least, we have the curse for not obeying. At the conclusion of his monument, Hammurabi added a curse on anybody that chooses not to obey the laws, basically cursing their life, their children, their land, their people, and their nation. The Bible has a similar warning in Deuteronomy 28:15, where it says that anybody that chooses not to obey the commandments and hearken unto the voice of God will have all of these curses come upon him. And these curses included curses on the person's life, their family, their possessions, their land being taken from them and taken away. And it continues from verses 16 all the way through to verse 68. So we've shown two claims of law ownership with astounding similarities. Based on the evidence that the Bible presents, did the Israelites steal the idea? Or did surrounding cultures take the knowledge that they had about the true God and incorporate it into their own idolatrous nations? We've seen that there is an original law base. There's been source material that's been passed down through the generations and confirmed again with Moses at Sinai. The evidence is there. The only thing that remains is to decide if the Bible is true to its word. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Remember, if you want to be the first to view our latest videos, subscribe and make sure to click the notification bell. Also, like and follow us on Facebook for additional daily content on ancient archaeology and biblical topics.